Hello, welcome back to the Community Outcomes meeting, and we've reached item 4 on the agenda, which is titled COVID Update. And again, just to remind everyone at the outset of the meeting, we have adapted this agenda to reflect clearly what has been a very unique period over the past few months, and indeed in terms of the way in which I've been having accountability meetings with the Chief Constable. For obvious reasons, it has very much centred on the response. So that's why we've asked for a report to discuss through some of the issues in that regard. So I will just start by asking a question around clearly we know that COVID has had a huge impact across policing and community safety, and can you tell us more about the work you've been doing and work in progress to support our communities across the West Yorkshire in how we're trying to achieve the shared outcomes in the police and crime plan? And I'll just list those. So that's tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, safeguarding vulnerable people, making sure the criminal justice system works for communities, and supporting victims and witnesses. Thanks. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, the 4 primary outcomes of the police and crime plan. It's a comprehensive question, and I'm therefore obliged to give you a comprehensive answer. I'll split it into the 4 areas. In terms of tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, we have seen a reduction in call demand and crime and antisocial behaviour reports during the height of the restrictions. However, as I've briefed you regularly and recently, over the last weeks and days as the restrictions have been lifted, we have now seen an increase in calls and crime and antisocial behaviour, not quite back to the levels we had before, but more to a return of pre-pandemic levels. We have, though, throughout all of this, maintained our neighbourhood policing team approach in the engaging, explaining, encouraging, and only when necessary enforcing. So neighbourhood policing teams have been at the forefront during COVID of tackling crime, of tackling antisocial behaviour, and of warning and informing the community about the spread of the virus. Because of the restrictions we've put in place due to our operational requirement to keep the front line in policing roles, we've cancelled a number of training environments, and also during this time we've seen a huge increase in calls coming into us. But because we've had different resources working in different places, and we've been able to cope on the main with that increase in reports around antisocial behaviour and also increases in calls around COVID-related matters. It's also enabled us during this period to ensure that we're on top of our criminal investigations and that we've been giving updates to members of the public, victims and witnesses. During this period, the neighbourhood policing teams have continued with their engagement, and they've indeed developed a new engagement strategy during this time so that they can continually actively involve communities in setting local priorities. And we're also about to launch a new antisocial behaviour policy to ensure that we've got the right, robust, structured, responsive approach for members of our communities and give them the right service they deserve. All of this is dovetailed because I've focused on the front line and neighbourhood policing teams in that. But in dealing with antisocial behaviour and crime, we've also, during the COVID period, had some significant positive interventions and impact by our protective services, crime directorate, around organised criminal activity, which does feature with antisocial behaviour on the streets of West Yorkshire. So whilst we've had to adapt and change during our response to the police and crime objectives around tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, we've done so, I think, quite adeptly and robustly during it. We've continued to drive down those crimes that harm communities and deal with people in seizure of drugs, money, firearms, weapons out of communities. It's the second area where, at the same time of all of this, and is dealing with how we respond to those people at most risk within our society, those most vulnerable, and our safeguarding of vulnerable people, because it is all of our professional assumptions and those in the Police and Crime Commissioner's office and in other local authorities that there will be people who seek to exploit vulnerable people during the time of COVID. Some vulnerable people have less access to professionals, whether that be teachers, social workers, carers, or others, and they've got greater ability to be abused through access to people in a more restricted environment. So throughout it all, we've reviewed our plans, changed our approach, and we've ensured that we've been safeguarding young people within society, we've been safeguarding vulnerable people within society, we've been safeguarding older people within society in a whole host of different arrays through our safeguarding units and districts. So we've not only progressed existing investigations as far as we can under the restrictions, we've continued to combat indecent images of children, child sexual exploitation and interfamiliar abuse during this time, and not least to say the big volume of domestic abuse that has occurred and continued during COVID restrictions. During this period, as you've alluded to, I think recently we've also conducted our Safeguarding Week as part of a communication strategy to ensure that we put safeguarding at the forefront of both communities, victims and police officers and staff's minds. And we've worked with local and regional and national leads to do so. So internally, we've raised awareness about the change in the environment to do with COVID and the pandemic and the restrictions. And externally, we've communicated with people to ensure we're giving them the support that we possibly can. So some examples of that in terms of domestic abuse, we've used the In Your Hands campaign for perpetrators of domestic abuse to show the impact that they can have on those most vulnerable people in their households. The victims, we've talked very openly through social media communications and through IDFAs and other public sector workers about coercive and controlling behaviour, initiatives such as the Dial 55 on the keypad and dangers for perpetrators and third-party reporting. And then for everybody, we've talked to both the public and to West Yorkshire and internally about third-party referrals and about professional curiosity. So we've worked with those roles supported by your office, such as the IDVAs, the Independent Domestic Violence Advisors, victim support, and we've worked with the multi-agency assessment tools, the local authorities, the MASHers, the front doors, as well as we have worked positively with the Magistrates' Courts and Tribunal Services. They've been very supportive in enabling us to still get domestic violence protection orders throughout COVID, and we've worked with them about processes and procedures for getting domestic abuse victims before the courts. I'm very grateful to the work of the CPS during this period, and we've had some progressive developments in domestic abuse charges. However, as you're aware, Commissioner, unfortunately, the National CPS weren't able to facilitate that for us. But we've worked with online reporting as well, and we're one of the few forces in the country to develop an online reporting tool for victims, and incorporated in that is safety mechanisms such as a quick exit button to enable them to get out of that. So we've continued with our face-to-face frontline key worker responsibility. We responded to calls for service. We've sent officers and staff into environments to protect people. We've continued with our investigations and arrests around safeguarding. We've continued with the management and monitoring of registered sex offenders, as well as the execution of search warrants, intelligence activity, online activity, and all the work we've done and continue to do around child sexual exploitation and abuse. The third area around criminal justice, it has been an unprecedented and challenging situation for the wider criminal justice system. I've been very grateful to you, Commissioner, for your chairing of the local criminal justice board and the work that you've done across agencies and setting off and involving in the recovery plan. We've been innovative again within West Yorkshire, and we've used the Skype facility to facilitate solicitors and interpreters and those charged with looking after vulnerable people in our cells to link in, to give advice, to come on to interviews and to support people who find themselves under arrest. We've monitored our prosecution processes, and we've adapted them to make sure that we're getting the files through to the Crown Prosecution Service where we're able to. And we've even changed and worked our methods of working and weekend working in order to get the files to them electronically and in paper where necessary throughout it. We have worked closely with our partner agencies in the criminal justice system. I've commented before around the restrictions placed upon them by the national structure, and I won't repeat those here, but I'm grateful, as I've said already, for the work the Criminal Justice Board has done. Lastly, the support for victims and witnesses. Officers and staff have continued to use electronic as well as face-to-face and telephone updates to victims and witnesses about the status of their investigations. They've done that to comply with the Victims Code of Practice, but most importantly because it's the right thing to do for victims and witnesses. We've introduced new IT systems to enable us to check that that work is ongoing, to keep people informed of their progress of their investigation. Once a prosecution starts, as you're aware, that's dealt with by our witness care unit, and they've had to change their practices, working structures. There's only 36 people working in that unit. They have a workload of around 290 cases each. They currently have 3,361 outstanding cases at magistrates and Crown Court, and they're looking after 18,312 civilian victims and witnesses. On top of that, there's many police officers, expert witnesses and professional witnesses. So I think they've done some outstanding work during this period of COVID restrictions, because all of the cases that have been adjourned, changed or moved, they've had to inform people, contact them, keep them updated, supply information to them and to the CPS and to the courts, all at short notice, to assist with keeping those people informed, updated as to what's happening with their criminal justice process, whether it's been relisted, moved or changed by the courts or location. And all of that they've had to do at the same time as managing their own welfare, their own social distancing and their own health and safety structures. But the witness care staff there have done some fantastic work. So they're the 4 areas of the police and crime plan. As I've briefed you regularly throughout this period, Commissioner, we've been progressive and front foot in all that we've done. But that is our role in policing, and that's what we've fulfilled. And we've changed and adapted, but we've still continued and committed to the outcomes and the objectives of the police and crime plan.
Yeah, no, thank you for that detailed update, John. And you know, it has been a really unique time, hasn't it, in terms of the issues that West Yorkshire Police and other colleagues have had to face. And you know, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody for the way, you know, as an organisation you've done that. And of course, also pleased to say that the vast majority of the public have complied with the restrictions and the regulations. And I know enforcement action has only been taken where it's had to be taken around the you know, the engagement and encourage approach rather than moving directly to enforcement. And obviously the well-being of the staff, as you've said, hugely important. And despite some of those initial teething problems with the PPE sort of procurement and some of those supply chains, again, I know you worked hard with colleagues through the Local Resilience Forum and other police forces to address that, and I'm pleased. You know, it's reached a much better situation in that regard over a number of weeks. And clearly we have seen a number of big reductions across crime categories, but I think we are starting to see some of those trends start to return back to some of the levels pre-COVID, albeit I think it will take a while to fully understand some of the trends and issues that have fallen out of this. And like you, I've been very concerned around the domestic abuse, domestic violence side of things, and we've moved again, working with yourselves and others to try and we have secured some additional funding to support a number of organisations who we can already commission to provide domestic abuse and domestic violence services, but also others that we don't commission who do some really great work in supporting vulnerable victims. And just finally, on the criminal justice things, absolutely. I mean, clearly there's a number of issues there that are outside your control and outside of my control, and we are making national representations pretty much every week on this with regards to the challenges around the backlogs that have inevitably built up during this period. But we won't rehearse some of that, because I know we've spoken about that in some of the other meetings we've attended. If I could just move on to explore some other aspects of this, John. Obviously, in terms of COVID breaches that have been recorded, has there been any work around looking at any potential bias, and how West Yorkshire Police have engaged with BAME community in particular during that period?
In terms of the enforcement activity, there's in the period that we're looking at, there's 591 penalty notices for disorder. So this is the enforcement activity where people have been engaged with. We've explained what's going on, and we've encouraged them not to partake in what they're doing, and only as a last resort have they been issued with a fixed penalty notice for payment of a fine in relation to breach of the coronavirus legislation. It's not something that we're going to lightly, it's not something we wanted to do, but these are in the main the people who are putting other people's lives potentially at risk through the spread of the virus. We've worked through the ethnicity of the individuals, and there is a self-defined ethnicity and there is an officer-defined ethnicity. Not everybody will choose to provide their self-defined ethnicity, but clearly we will always get, where possible, an officer-defined ethnicity. There is disproportionality, I don't believe bias, because I've got no evidence to say so, but there is disproportionality in terms of those people who've been given a fixed penalty notice for COVID-related offences. In terms, when we look at that further, in terms of our black community, there is no disproportionality. The tickets exactly correlate to the residential population of West Yorkshire. In terms of our mixed heritage community, there is no disproportionality. The tickets exactly correlate to the residential population of West Yorkshire. In terms of Asian heritage individuals, there is disproportionality. Now, there's a residential population across West Yorkshire of Asian people of 13.1% as per the last census of 2011, as you've said, that is up for review, and the tickets issued to individuals is 33%. So on the face of it, there is a significant disproportionate amount of tickets given to Asian residents of West Yorkshire compared to the population. However, I think it's beneficial to explain how we end up being in the areas where we end up issuing these tickets, and we respond to calls for service from the public who are reporting breaches of the COVID restrictions. So in our call centre and our tasking and our command and control structure, they then deploy resources, mainly neighbourhood frontline policing resources, but also supports by operational support. They are deployed to the areas where the public are saying that people are breaching the health restrictions and putting other people's lives at risk. And we overlay the call demand and the deployment demand with the tickets, and that's where we get the disproportionality, because we're going to the areas where the public are stating that other members of the community are breaching the restrictions. So the point I'm labouring is it's not an officer-based random approach to self-deploy. There is an element of community-based, intelligence-led reporting. However, we are, of course, always in the current climate going to be wise and aware to scrutiny of these. So we've already undertaken scrutiny panels with members of the public who've reviewed our issuing of tickets and gone through independent advisory groups, as well as we've got the vast majority on body worn video and other elements. So there is not a disproportionate amount of black or mixed heritage people being given tickets in West Yorkshire, but against the census population, there is a disproportionate amount of BAME Asian members of our community. However, there is a disproportionate amount of reporting stating that certain communities have been breaching the legislation. Is that sufficient?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really helpful, and it is important to look at in detail around the context of some of this. And I do know that there's some work going on at the national level around the figures for, you know, the entirety of policing in England and Wales. So I think it's important that we wait probably for that data to come out as well, to have even a better picture. And as we touched on earlier, you know, we do need to bear in mind the census data now being so out of date, which is important to understand. And the new census will be done next year, we're told, which is, you know, clearly due, I think, on a 10-yearly basis. And for example, I know when we look at some of those previously issued national statistics, for example, we've heard that North Yorkshire at certain points had issued more enforcement notices than West Yorkshire, and clearly West Yorkshire, in terms of a population, is about 4 times larger than North Yorkshire. So again, it's really just understanding some of that context, and indeed overall relatively small numbers that have actually been issued with enforcement notices. I don't know whether you just wanted to quickly comment on that.
Yeah, the overall enforcement is very low, and as you've identified, and as I've said, it's the last resort. It's not what we wish to do, and it's only with a view to trying to prevent the spread of the virus for those people who potentially would spread the virus. Yeah, the variety of forces have issued disproportionate numbers compared to their size and population, and I'll allow for my colleagues in other parts of the country to account for them.
Yeah. Okay, and you touched on in your earlier comments regarding the number of missing persons or incidents that have reduced during the lockdown. Can you just explain what measures were taken with partners to ensure that vulnerable children were safe?
Yeah, again, if there's any good news in COVID, it has meant that there's been less vulnerable children missing from home, whether that be missing from their parental or carer's home, or whether that be missing from being in care of the local authority. So we've been pleased to see a significant reduction in children missing from home. And whilst we've returned out of the latest lockdown measures, the missing from home has not returned to normality in terms of normal levels. So less people are missing now than there were before. However, throughout the whole COVID lockdown period, we've continued to do what we do with local authorities, with the children's services, for those children in care and for those children who are at risk. We'll continue to evaluate and look at every individual missing from home, an individual child, and make sure we've got the right multi-agency response to them. Clearly, within policing, our operational response is around grading their missing from home episode and an operational requirement to get them back into a safe environment as quickly as possible. The vast majority of children are at high risk when they're going missing because they are important to us to get them back into a care environment. And then we work with either parents, carers, or the local authority to see how we can go forward from there. As you're aware from previous discussions, we do have a number of repeat missing from home, and we work with trigger plans and engagement opportunities. So throughout the COVID lockdown period, we've applied exactly the same processes and principles. We've been pleased to see less children being at risk, but we'll continue to work, whether physically or through interagency meetings on Skype, to ensure that we plan and prepare for them going missing where we can, but also respond and review and evaluate their missing episodes to try and prevent them going missing again in the future. So they have still been at the forefront of looking after vulnerable children. There's been some practicalities in at the height of the restrictions. It's been more obvious when people have been out and about, so that's assisted us. But at the same time, we've also looked to the cause of their missing episodes and made sure that they're safe in their existing environments as well. So some good news in and amongst the tragedies of COVID-19 is that, generally speaking, throughout that period, with fewer children going missing, there's been fewer children at risk of significant harm, either physical or sexual harm, whilst they're away from home.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I mean, obviously, it's good that we've seen those numbers continue to fall. But I know that in other conversations we have had a concern regarding the fact that clearly schools have, although been open for some pupils, even some of the ones that were deemed to be vulnerable haven't really taken up those places that were on offer. So I know it was, again, if you can say a little bit more around the work you've been doing with some of the other authorities, just to potentially look at those situations.
Yeah, so we've worked with the local authority children's services on an operational basis in the 5 districts, and then into the sub areas where they've worked with identifying vulnerable children who haven't been attending school. And we've worked and facilitated social workers and those people charged with working with young people to ensure that they've got their visits, and been very impressed by the local authorities and the children's services across West Yorkshire, that they've utilised school staff as well to engage with vulnerable children who are not attending school during this period. All the authorities, I think, have taken a unilateral decision that all children in care would be attending at the school premises as well. So that's been very beneficial to look after those children in care. But in a combined approach, whether it be local authority, children's services, education services, or indeed ourselves through Safer Schools or neighbourhood policing teams, I think we've worked hard to try and identify, contact and encourage vulnerable children to attend at school. And as I say, easier to do for those who are actually in care, but where they're still with parents or with carers, we still engage with them and encourage them. But it's just sad to have seen such a low uptake throughout the COVID period. But I'm sure all children are looking forward to a return to normality and a return to school in September.
Yeah, definitely. No, thank you for that response, John. We'll just now move on to some of the questions that have come in related to the COVID period. And again, it's just to emphasise that all those questions that we're not able to answer in detail today will receive written responses. So again, thanks everybody that's taken time to send questions in. So I just wanted to run through quickly 4 questions that have been that I think are absolutely relevant. So the first one is, during the COVID-19 outbreak, has the number of officer PCSOs on patrol in West Yorkshire communities increased?
Yes, a good question. The simple answer is yes. We've had more officers and staff out on patrol than we have had previously in terms of routine policing activity, but they've had more work to do and they've been attending more incidents, primarily at its height COVID related. So that's occurred because We've continued recruiting during this period. We've recruited, bringing more police officers and staff into the organisation. Retirements and exiters from the organisation has reduced, so those two things together has meant there's been a few more people in the organisation. We've used special constables and volunteers, and I really do want to say a special thank you to special constables across West Yorkshire, because they've done some outstanding work supporting policing at this difficult time. Those of them who have been furloughed and have been able to work full time with us have come and done so. Those of them who have key workers themselves and have gone on to other work, we've released from their duties and they've gone full time into their other professions. So they brought more capability and capacity to the streets. Our routine sickness non-attendance was reduced during this period, but we have had more abstractions like any employer actions through COVID. We've also stopped our training in many environments apart from the very essential crime training. So a combination of all of those factors has enabled us to have more frontline officers, more people out on the streets, and as I say, dealing with more calls and more reports. We've had less crimes to investigate, but equally we've had some very complex situations developing throughout the COVID period. So I've been very, very impressed by the approach of police officers, police staff, special constables and volunteers of West Yorkshire. As I said earlier, they've stepped forward during this crisis. I think their morale and motivation has been outstanding, and they put themselves into danger. They put themselves into challenging situations at times when other people are shielding and having to keep themselves safe. Our staff have been out there, so I thank them for their commitment and their professionalism. But I hope that the nature of the question was that people have seen more police officers and staff on the streets of West Yorkshire over the last 12 weeks, which is a good thing.
Again, thank you for that reply, John. And just to echo your comments around the special constables, the volunteers, of course, we've just had Neighbourhood Watch Awareness Week as well, all playing a really vital role. Like I say, the commitment of those special constables who have put in so many hours over and above what they would normally do, with the support of some of their employers, is outstanding. And I certainly recognise that in some of the statements I've made, as well as yourself. Clearly the whole volunteering ethos is really welcome. So very pleased, and a big thank you to everybody that's played their part with the front line in providing that visibility and assistance during COVID, and it's, as we know, it's still ongoing as well. Just moving on to the next question, and again, this is something that we know has been raised with us in other meetings and through casework. Clearly, some people feel that speeding and dangerous driving have increased in lockdown, particularly traffic on the roads. Is this an issue that's been picked up, and if so, what are we doing to deal with the concerns at a strategic level?
Yeah, it's been a sad consequence of the COVID pandemic circumstances that as the roads have been quieter and the traffic volumes have been reduced, some members of our society have decided to use that opportunity to drive at excessive speed. Speed is one of the fatal four of speed. Seatbelts, distraction and alcohol and drugs, and as we know all too well, speed contributes very tragically to fatalities. I've been very grateful for your involvement and your support around the work that we've done around speed awareness and dangerous driving, and the support of yourself and your office commissioner of outstanding groups such as Break and other charities who work with local authorities and the police to reduce the casualties on the road of West Yorkshire. So specifically during the COVID restrictions, as and when we've received reports of excessive speed, we've mapped them and then we've analysed them. We've used the partnership approach of the West Yorkshire Casualty Prevention Partnership, and both the use of their camera enforcement units, the proactive ones, as well as deploying and tasking roads policing officers and neighbourhood policing team officers where they can. And also we have a proactive intercept team, as well as a proactive roads policing team that I know you're aware of across West Yorkshire, who's also been combating it. Very sadly, we can't be everywhere all of the time, but we've done what we can during this difficult time to reduce the speeds that people are driving upon. In the larger transport infrastructures of the motorway and the A roads, in some ways that's easier to enforce, but it is on the country roads, the by roads, the community roads and the inner city roads that often most harm is caused, and it's more problematic to deal with. But the roads policing officers, neighbourhood policing team, camera partnership have all been out there. We've worked where we can with the local authorities as well, and their responsibilities under transport and roads, the roads network. So I think that partnership approach is there, the enforcement approach is there, but ultimately it is around education and awareness, and some of the campaigns that you've been supportive of, Commissioner, we're grateful for, because it's to educate and make people aware of the dangers of speed, irrespective of the road being empty than it was before. So, as I said, it's a sad consequence of the roads being empty that people seem to put themselves and, more importantly, other people at such risk through speed. But we have had enforcement and prevention activity ongoing throughout COVID.
Yeah, no, thank you. And like I say, it's just ironic, isn't it, that with the much less traffic on the roads, the perception around some drivers using roads as speed tracks basically has definitely been raised with us, as we know, not only through this question but in other meetings. But certainly, as you know, we have approached the partnership in West Yorkshire around adopting what's called a Vision Zero type approach, which has been adopted in London around serious casualties and deaths on the road. So I think that's a longer term ambition, no doubt about that. And certainly I've been keeping an eye on social media and looking at all the good work around roads policing and the Operation Steerside, for example, that carries on in the Bradford district, and similar initiatives now that have also been put into place across the whole of West Yorkshire. Ultimately this is an education awareness programme as well as one of enforcement. But thank you for that reply, and obviously I know that work will be ongoing, targeting where issues do arise. There was one question around the strategy strategy West Yorkshire Police have to tackle hate crime, and including within that, of course, Islamophobic hate crime.
So the first point on this, and know that I've laboured this before to you, Commissioner, is that we've got to get our data right, and we've got to understand what we're dealing with, and therefore I'm pleased to report that we're one of the only two forces in the country who've got an outstanding grading around recording crime correctly. So when we're looking at hate crime that's recorded, I'm confident that of the reports that come to us, they're all recorded correctly. So on that basis, then, Islamophobic hate crime is a form of religious and belief hate crime. It is as abhorrent as all hate crime is. It is isolating. It is upsetting. It damages community cohesion, and it is often against people who have little or no choice in terms of their background or their religion that they've chosen to follow. So all hate crime incidents and hate crime reports are recorded, assessed, investigated under our hate crime strategy, which is where the element of Islamophobic hate crime comes under. There is additional specialist resources. We have hate crime coordinators working alongside knowledgeable and experienced neighbourhood policing team officers who will look specifically at hate crime and look at them through the eyes of somebody who understands what that crime means to that individual. And every victim of hate crime and Islamic Islamic hate crime in this case is entitled to and receive the same level of service as all hate crime. It is a very personal attack on an individual, and we understand what it means to both them as an individual and to communities. As you're well aware, because you've been very supportive of them, third-party reporting centres actively encourage the reporting of hate crime to us. They feed into the strategy and approach to ensure that people have got confidence to come forward, and whether that be through local authorities or victim support or Tal Mama in this case, or Stop Hate UK, hate crime alliances, they're all there. So we're as encouraging and supportive as we can to get people to report. We analyse, respond, investigate, support victims, and then we scrutinise our response to them. As I've said with other areas, we are very open and transparent. We have hate crime scrutiny panels to ensure that those hate crimes that occur are scrutinised by members of the public to see that we've done what we should be doing in relation to the policing of it. We've continued to train people, whether that be frontline call takers or officers and staff out on the streets of West Yorkshire, or neighbourhood policing officers, into the harm that hate crime can cause, and specifically religious hate crime in this case. So it is a societal issue to prevent it, but we play our role in the enforcement and the prevention of it. The one hate crime is one too many. In terms of specific anti-Islamic hate crime, last year there was 182 throughout the whole year. This year, on the same 12 months rolling programme, was about 187, so it's remained constant. What we do see is at times of national or international events, occasionally hate crime increases and then decreases again, and that should give us confidence in our reporting processes that we're getting them right. But there isn't a specific increase ongoing at this moment in time in relation to anti-Islamic hate crime, but it is one of the hate crimes that we do focus upon because we understand, as I said, the impact upon the individual and upon the community and the religious community in this case. So I'm confident we've got the strategies, processes, structures and then scrutiny in place to deal with it. But what we've got to work with is other partners in local authorities and community safety partners and voluntary sector to continue the education and awareness to ensure that we prevent such crimes as well as just deal with them.
Yeah, no, thank you. And as you say, working together with partners is a key element to this, because we often know that these types of crimes, individuals would often prefer to report it through a third-party organisation to start with, and to that end, as you know, we work with a number of organisations in West Yorkshire, and indeed I funded the Stop Hate UK app, which was the first of its type to be made available. So that's one other element of supporting that strategy. So thank you for that reply. And then finally on the questions, and you might have already sort of addressed part of this, John, it's what impact has COVID-19 had on domestic violence and the impact on children's mental health, and what support do the police feel they need from mental health services in order to address this need?
So in terms of domestic violence in totality, we saw a small reduction at the beginning of the COVID restriction period and then a sort of gradual return to normality. Post-COVID restrictions, our professional assessment was that it would have increased and we would have had some historic reporting of domestic abuse. We haven't seen that actually. There's been an increase in reporting since the restrictions have been lifted, but the nature and time frame of what's been reported is more within the last 3 days of the offence. So we haven't seen what we anticipated, which was historic reporting. So we're still very cautious and aware of that, because it goes against much of our professional assumption as to what would have happened during that period. But thankfully, so far, the statistical indicators are that the the pandemic crisis and putting people in a closer proximity to each other at this stage hasn't shown an increase in crime. But I'll hold my opinion on that as we can take it forward and see a greater analysis over a longer period. Specifically in terms of children and the mental health associated with them being present during a domestic violence incident, we have had some significant concerns, as we've alluded to, with vulnerable children and people not having access to teachers, social workers, friends, professionals, to be able to show the signs of distress and upset when they have been on the subject of violence themselves or been present during violence. But we've continued with our same response to domestic violence reports. We've been entering people's households, arresting offenders, and we've continued to do our key work in this about listening to the voice of a child, ensuring we speak to children appropriately to establish how they've been physically, emotionally or mentally harmed by the incident, and about watching and understanding their demeanour to ensure that we can refer them properly. We've made the referrals into children's services and to other mental health services such as CAMS and other front doors, as well as the voluntary sector, and that has all continued because it's part of our core policing mission. With or without COVID, we're going to safeguard people, and that includes children. I specifically, what more support do we think we need from mental health services? I don't think there is anything specific other than the challenges that all public sectors have received recently over the last 10 years about budget cuts and reductions to service. I know that many mental health service provision is under some significant pressure, but the vast majority of the time they've got exactly the same outlook and ethos of us to support children. Children at risk from mental health as a result of domestic violence comes right up there. So I'm pleased to report that we haven't seen the increases and the impact in COVID and domestic abuse that we thought we would see. And I'm also pleased to report we've been able to support children throughout all of this. And I don't think there's anything I've really specifically asked for from children's mental health services that they can deliver that's not limited by funding.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I mean, just on the domestic abuse aspects, as you know, this is something we've discussed throughout in terms of a professional view around potential increases in obviously a very, as I've said before, unique situation of lockdown restrictions when families at home for much longer periods. So I think, there's still some longer term analysis, I think, to come out of all this. Mental health services, absolutely agree with you. As we know, there's been a chronic underfunding of those types of services, in my view, in recent years, over a long period of years, 10 years or so. And I suspect that's an area that is definitely going to need a proper relook at investment around counselling and therapeutic counselling services, working with schools, actually, as well as safeguarding teams. And clearly it's an issue that goes well beyond policing in that sense. So some really interesting questions there, and posing some tough decisions that I suspect that are going to need to be looked at in the coming months and years. So that's the end of the COVID update and the public questions side of that. As I've said, we will respond to all the questions that haven't been addressed as part of today's meeting. And again, thank you to everyone that's sent in those questions, which have been really intelligent ones, I think, and highlighting some of those key issues.